So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the online webinar to present the transit options as part of the Portage La Prairie Transit Feasibility Study. My name is Megan Bowles, and I'm a consultant with WSP, and I'm leading the stakeholder and public engagement for the study. I would like to begin by acknowledging that I live in Treaty 1 territory at the crossroads of the Anishinaabe, Métis, Cree, Dakota, and Oji Cree nations, and on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe peoples and the homeland of the Métis Nation. I am joined today by other members of the project team from WSP, Diana Emerson, who is the project manager, Bradley Muller, our engagement planner, and Aaron Toop, our transit planning lead, whom you will hear from later on in the presentation when we are discussing some of the details of the study findings. The purpose of the presentation today is to introduce you to the project team, present what we heard as part of Phase 1 engagement in June, present the transit options, including explaining potential impacts or constraints of the options, and providing you with an opportunity to share your input and ask questions. Overall, the purpose of, Brad, next slide. So overall, the purpose of the study is to identify and assess the feasibility of public transit options in the city, which may include potential service options to places like Poplar Bluff Industrial Park, Dakota Teepee First Nation, as well as Long Plain First Nation. This study is important because public transit introduces benefits to a community. For example, having transportation options increases independence and equity by improving access to vital services like schools, medical facilities, and work. It is also an important strategy to address climate change. We know the community has been expressing an interest in transit for several years. In 2015, PCRC released a report that outlined needs and reviewed potential models for public transportation and recommended that a feasibility study would be a good first step in exploring those solutions. And in the spring of this year, the city engaged WSP to conduct this study. The scope of this project is to develop transit alternatives, evaluate those alternatives, and identify a preferred alternative. The study area encompasses all of the city and areas outside of the city, including Poplar Bluff Industrial Park, Dakota Teepee First Nation, and Long Plain First Nation, and Southport. We completed this space map at the beginning of the project of public transit areas of interest, which identifies several locations that may be considered transit destinations. So places like employment areas like Poplar Bluff, as I mentioned, downtown, medical centers, Southport, amenity areas like Island Park, and West End commercial areas, for example. We'll touch more on this a little bit later in the presentation, but it did serve as a starting point for our analysis of destinations as part of the study. This is the study timeline with, we sort of have the technical transit planning tasks on the top and the engagement tasks on the bottom. So we initiated the project in May and completed a review of existing conditions in the Phase 1 engagement in early summer. After this, we conducted a travel needs assessment and options development and analysis through July and August. And now we are here in September as part of Phase 2 engagement, presenting the options to you and obtaining your feedback on those options. And then we'll proceed with selecting a preferred option and finalizing the study in the fall. Phase 1 engagement was intended to inform the public and stakeholders about the scope and intent of the study and to gather information on key destinations and transportation needs. So this information really informed the transit options that we've developed. As part of Phase 1, we hosted a virtual stakeholder workshop in June, and we also had a survey that was open to the public available on the city's website to collect that information on transit features and key destinations. The purpose of this Phase 2 engagement, is to present those options that we have developed to you and obtain feedback on those options. In Phase 1 of engagement, we heard that ease of use, meaning that users can easily understand how to access the system, and reliable service are important. We also heard that an accessible transit system, meaning one that provides an option for people who do not have access to a personal vehicle, is also important. As part of the survey, we did ask what an affordable system meant to people. And on average, respondents noted that fares should be between $2.50 and $5. When asked about key destinations, the West End commercial areas, schools, particularly the high school, and employment areas rose to the top. I'm now going to pass the presentation over to our transit planner, Erin Toop, who will help to tie in what we heard during phase 1 engagement with the goals the city has for transit and to present the transit options.
Thanks, Megan. I'll apologize. I have a toddler who just came home from daycare, so we might hear a little evidence of her in the background. So early in the study, we worked closely with the city and PCRC to articulate 5 main goals for transit. They're that it improves accessibility, affordability, and environmental sustainability, to develop a solution for transit that's based on engagement and partnerships, and to provide a service that is flexible. We'll go to the next slide, please. The public transit can take many forms, and these are the key models that we considered in Portage-La Prairie. So fixed route service is the type of service that you're probably most familiar with. It uses fixed routes, schedules, and stops, and is typically served by a conventional city bus. Fixed route service is best when there's a lot of travel demand concentrated between major destinations and along a route or a corridor. On-demand transit is the next option. It has no fixed schedule or routing. It provides service through a coverage zone and is available during a predetermined window, like 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., for example. On-demand transit software and applications that coordinate ride booking and driver dispatching have made on-demand transit a more popular solution in the last 5 years. On-demand service is best for providing coverage to a wide area when there's a limited amount of demand or ridership. Hybrid systems use a combination of both fixed routes and on-demand, and the fixed routes would serve areas where there's higher demand patterns. On-demand service would cover destinations with lower demand. And finally, taxi or shuttle partnerships operate like an on-demand service, but with the taxi company as the transit operator. And typically municipalities would subsidize taxi rides up to a certain amount. In this model, the municipalities don't see revenue, and there's limited opportunity for ridership growth within a fixed budget. So for this reason, we haven't considered taxi partnerships as a core transit option in Portage-La Prairie, but it may still be considered as part of an on-demand transit option where taxi companies could provide coverage outside of the transit system operating hours, for example, or at low demand times of the day. We can go to the next slide. So we use 3 primary inputs to develop transit options for this study: a jurisdictional scan, public engagement, and a travel needs assessment. And I'll talk about each of these 3 in the next slides. So our jurisdictional scan focused on communities that have deployed on-demand or hybrid transit systems to understand the lessons learned from these newer operating models. We reviewed communities and interviewed transit planners from 7 jurisdictions in Canada, including Pal River, which is a very similar size to Portage-La Prairie, and Cochrane, Alberta, which had no transit service prior to launching a fully on-demand transit system in 2019. So all communities are satisfied with their on-demand or hybrid systems, and they find them more scalable and adaptable to changing demand. This has been especially relevant in the last 18 months with COVID having a huge impact on transit use and travel patterns across communities. We'll go to thanks. So we've incorporated input from stakeholder and public engagement, as Megan mentioned, by understanding that work and school trips are some of the most important trips for transit coverage in Portage. We also heard that the West End commercial area is a key destination for both employment and shopping, but that the hospital, schools, and Poplar Bluff Industrial Park are also very important destinations in the community. We also understood from the first round of engagement that there's a preference for a reliable transit service and preference for short wait times and short travel times. And so the final component of our option development was looking at a travel needs assessment and really an option or analysis of travel patterns around Portage-La Prairie on both weekdays and weekends. So Based on our review of travel patterns, we found that the West End commercial area and downtown have the most demand, and that most trips happen between these two destinations. There was less travel to the hospital area and the industrial areas and the recreation sites than we expected to find, but that doesn't mean that those areas are less important. Again, we've used the travel needs assessment as only one piece of the puzzle, and so it doesn't outweigh what we heard during public engagement or for the city's goals to provide access to as many residents and destinations as possible with transit service. So with that, the three core transit options that we've developed are a fully on-demand transit system, a hybrid transit system, and a fixed route transit system. And each of these options can accommodate a different level of ridership, and the number of buses in each option could vary, but we're starting with the assumption that there would be two transit vehicles, say a van, a shuttle, or a bus, operating in each of these options. There are other considerations in each of these options, like what the transit fare would be. As Megan alluded to, we would incorporate your feedback on the fare from the first round of public engagement. We'd also look at what size of vehicles to use and whether to use electric or zero emission fleet vehicles in the system. These considerations could apply to any of the options, so we won't focus on them today, but we will detail these in our final report. So option one is a fully on-demand system. As I said, with the fully on-demand system, we would propose a core coverage zone that covers the city limits, as well as Long Plain and Dakota Teepee First Nations. Secondary coverage zones shown in blue could include Poplar Bluff and Southport to provide access to these destinations during key times like shift changes. Within all of the on-demand coverage area, we assume that bus stops could be virtual or potentially even provide door-to-door service. With two transit vehicles in operation, this option would work well for a lower demand scenario, meaning a lower ridership scenario, and would be a great way for the city to test transit service in the community. With a fully on-demand system, the city could collect data about transit travel patterns, and that would inform any future planning or implementation of fixed routes later on. This option can provide coverage to the entire community. Often with on-demand, there's a concern about how people without smartphones or without credit cards might access the system, but there are solutions like call-in centers or transit passes to make the system more accessible for more people. A fully on-demand system is less likely to save greenhouse gas emissions from people switching from driving to taking the bus, but it would place more priority on mobility for people who don't otherwise have access to a vehicle. So another benefit of an on-demand system is that it's very flexible and service can be adjusted to match the demand. And so with that, we can move to option two. Thanks. We're proposing a hybrid system for a medium ridership scenario in which there's more travel demand between the downtown area and the West End commercial area. With this, we would imagine that one transit vehicle would operate just like I described in the on-demand scenario, while the other would operate on a fixed route, which is shown in purple, or like the one shown in purple. The fixed route bus would cycle along this route approximately every 30 minutes. So this option has a lot of similar coverage and accessibility benefits as the fully on-demand system, but also a bit more capacity to accommodate higher ridership between those key destinations of the West End and downtown. There may be more sustainability potential with this option as it has a bit more capacity for people to ride transit on the fixed route and therefore kind of switch modes of travel, say from their personal vehicle onto the bus. And so we can move on to option three. For a high demand scenario, when there's too much demand for only two on-demand buses to accommodate, we would propose two fixed routes. The purple route is the same as I described in option two, and the blue route is designed to connect Dakota Teepee and Long Plain First Nations with the downtown area, and then provide opportunities from there to transfer on to the purple route. Both of these routes would cycle approximately every 30 minutes. So this fixed route system can accommodate more passengers, but the drawback is that it limits transit coverage to only areas adjacent to these two routes. Fixed routes have the potential to carry more people per hour and can potentially shift more people from driving to taking transit, but the sustainability benefits would depend on actual ridership numbers on these routes. This option is least flexible, as changes in a fixed route service typically require significant planning, scheduling, and even bus stop infrastructure. And so on this last slide is a summary of the transit options and a recap of the 3 scenarios. Our evaluation of capacity for riders in each of these options is based, like I said, on the assumption that there are 2 transit vehicles operating. But this is just a starting point based on sort of a high-level understanding of what the city's budget for a transit service might be. Any of these options can accommodate more passengers by adding more transit vehicles to the system. So an on-demand option, for example, does have the opportunity to accommodate more passengers. We would just need to introduce an extra transit vehicle to the system. And so with that, I will pass it back to Megan, who will talk a bit more about next steps.
Thanks, Erin. Okay. I am going to just stop sharing that screen because we're actually going to move over to Mentimeter, which is an online polling software. And this will sort of be the interactive, if you will, portion of the session tonight.
If you like, Megan, I think I can share now. It seems to have caught up. It's no longer lagging or
okay.
Just kick me out of the chat there for a second.
Okay. I'll just go into, I'll just share my screen for Menti here, and then maybe you can go back to the PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, sounds good.
Afterwards. So here we go. So you can head over to menti.com and use the code at the top of the screen there. It's 746893330. So you could go to menti.com either in another browser on the computer that you're on, or on an iPad or your phone if you have that handy, or even in another browser on your phone or iPad if that's how you're joining us today. So again, menti.com and use the code 746893330. It looks like some people are here already. They're pressing the little heart at the bottom of the screen. So that's great. So it's sort of fun to use this. I'll take you through some questions so that we can get your feedback on the transit option. So I'm just logging in myself here. Okay, so we did this for part of the stakeholder engagement in June, and it worked quite well. It's a bit of an empathy exercise, sort of asking you guys to put yourself in the place of various personas that we're trying to make sure we meet the needs of in Portage La Prairie with the Transit Feasibility Study. So there's 4 personas that I'll take you through. So the first is a family of 5. So the idea being to put yourself in the place of a family of 5 and rate the transit options based on that persona. So Menti will ask you to rate all 3, sort of your first choice, your second choice, and your third choice. And we'll get some live answers here on what people feel. So again, it looks like the I can't see the number at the top. Brad, do you have just because it's
Yep, I put the number in the chat as well.
Okay, great, thank you.
Yeah, and the link, so you can click on it there and it'll follow to the website.
Okay. So it might be hard to sort of remember the transit options that Erin went through. So again, option 1 was the fully on demand. So that was sort of the orange blob, if you will, with the blue blobs for Southport and Poplar Bluff Industrial Park. Option 2 was the hybrid fixed and on demand. So the purple, the single fixed route, sort of with the on demand of option 1, and then option 3 was the fixed route. So we have some feedback here that option 2, the hybrid fixed and on demand, is what people are thinking that a family of 5, for example, would prefer. So we'll move on to the next persona, which is seniors. So again, looking to put yourself in their place and rate these options again. So we're going to do this 4 times for the different personas, and I'll be interested to see, you know, sort of which option comes out on top for each one. So it was option 2, option 1, and then followed by option 3 for the family of 5.
Megan, sorry to interrupt. There's a question from Morag. Just to clarify, we are assuming that an on-demand option would be likely a small number of cars in operation, and I believe the number was 2. And that was correct. Erin, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's correct. We would assume that there would be kind of 2 transit vehicles in each of the options. And I would say maybe thinking of them not necessarily about the number of vehicles in operation, because that's something that can change, but more sort of the characteristics of how the service would work.
And this is Jocelyn here. I just wanted to mention that it's, it wouldn't likely be cars. It would be like a large van or that type of thing.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully that clarifies your question, Morag. So answers are coming in on this one. Again, that option 2, that hybrid fixed and on demand, is coming in first, with the fixed route option, second, and third fully on demand. So interesting, sort of a bit different there for second and third place, I believe, when compared to the family of 5. The next persona is newcomers. So these could be individuals that are new to Portage la Prairie, new to Manitoba, new to Canada, all sorts of scenarios there for sure. And obviously have specific needs for transit in a new city. So again, everybody's getting good at this, and all the answers are coming in quickly. So just looking for your rating between option 1, option 2, and option 3. So we'll just wait for a few more. I think we had 11 come in for the last one. So yeah. Okay, so first again with that option 2, and some more votes for option 3, and then the fully on demand as the third. I'm actually sort of surprised at that the fully on demand option is coming in third with these ones. The final persona that I want you to think about today is if you were a student, and rating the options based on if you had that perspective, and you know what your different you know sort of feelings might be towards these different options, and how they might rate against each other. Okay, so thank you. Looks like option 3 for this one. So fixed route. Again, maybe some of the considerations if you're a student is sort of you're often just going, you know, between school and home, for example, or that's sort of your most typical trip. And so for you, maybe the fixed route sort of works the best. So that's interesting in this one, that option 3 and option 2 in terms of preference are flipped really here from the other ones. So just a refresher on option 1, and we have just sort of each option here with a question. But just a reminder here that option 1 is the on-demand option, and fully on demand. So we have the core on-demand zone for most of Portage la Prairie, including Dakota Teepee First Nation, and then sort of some secondary on-demand zones, including Southport and Poplar Bluff Industrial Park. So what are some of the issues you might consider for option one? So on your slide, depending on how you're joining us on Menti, it'll just sort of ask, there'll be a text box that comes up and you can put in your answer. So, you know, what are the issues with option one that you see of a fully on-demand system? So a lot of people didn't rate them the highest in the previous questions when we asked sort of how you felt about them through those perspectives of various personas. So we're looking here to sort of find out more specifically, you know, what are some of the issues with this fully on-demand system. So we're getting some answers come in here. You guys can reply multiple times if you have more than sort of one point or one thing to say. So long wait times for a ride, too much planning needed for on-demand. People aren't tech savvy or who don't have access to a phone will not be able to use it. Being late because of multiple people being dropped off before you, and various busy times for those secondary zones. Timing of rides would be a problem, and not enough availability for the demand, potentially needing to book in advance to secure a ride. So some I think, you know, we're hearing timing options and sort of pre-planning, which I don't know, Erin, is typically, I would think that the on-demand is you know, typically attractive, you know, to not plan for, but I guess what's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think these are good points. Something I should have touched on in the presentation is that it is possible to talk about the amount of wait time that's allowable, or kind of have a average wait time, and then aim for that in the transit system. So the wait times is a piece that's manageable if the on-demand system is set up correctly. And what I've heard and what we find is that sometimes wait times are shorter with on-demand because you don't have to wait that 30 minutes for the fixed route bus to come again. You might have to wait, you know, only 10 minutes for the on-demand bus to come pick you up. But I think also seeing here kind of the intuitive sense that when ride requests increase, then wait times would also tend to increase with an on-demand system. So that would have to be managed by adding an extra shuttle or an extra bus to the fleet in order to provide those shorter wait times again.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So a few other comments sort of trickling in here again, some related to like accessing that on-demand system. So, you know, having to have a cell phone or access to Wi-Fi, you know, and like a credit card, for example, to access the system. I know, Erin, you had touched on the fact that there's, you know, there are sort of solutions to that, whether that be sort of a pass card or something like that. But again, people would still have to, you know, sort of get that, I guess, and pre-plan for that. So some concerns on sort of how far ahead you would have to book, people not being comfortable sharing a vehicle with strangers, not being sure you'd have a ride home afterwards. So again, sort of that reliability. So for example, at the grocery store where you might be traveling home with a bunch of groceries. So some comments here on, you know, many youth who do not have enough money for cell data or Wi-Fi and still need a ride. If it's fixed, they always know when it comes, for example. Okay, so that's great. Thank you for your comments there. I'll just move on to the next one here. So the next question is the same question, but in relation to that option 2. So this is that hybrid fixed and on demand. So sort of trying to sort of get to the best of both worlds here. So we have the purple route here, which is a potential fixed route, as well as the core on demand and secondary on demand zones. So the question here, and just I hear there's some people joining because I hear the ding. So if you check in the chat, you can go to menti.com and log in with the number there, and you can answer these questions sort of live in real time, and your answers will show up on the screen. So again, with respect to option 2, that hybrid fixed and on-demand route, what are some of the issues you might see with this? you can also, if there's benefits, for example, for this one that you want to highlight for us as well, that would be good. So the location of bus stops, so I don't know if that's in specific response to sort of where exactly that purple route might be. I think at this point, and Erin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the sort of actual location of bus stops is, a bit conceptual at this point. So
that's correct.
Yeah.
That's something that could be detailed at a later stage.
Okay, great. So cost is an issue that's been identified for option 2. The far northwest of town exclude from the fixed route despite being an area with higher poverty rates and more likely having families without cars. That single fixed route appears to be limited and not enough buses to get on demand. The route needs to go a little bit more east towards the hospital clinic area. And could the data collected be a little off because of COVID? No one was traveling to the hospital. I don't know, Erin, could you speak to that in terms of?
That's a great flag. That issue was on our radar, and so that's why we looked at 2019 data as a measure of travel to not be taking COVID into account.
Yeah. So hours of fixed service could be an issue that does not reflect shift work. And it doesn't want to let me scroll here to see my other ones. There we go. How often the bus comes on the fixed route. Operating times would need to be the fixed route would have to operate outside of peak working hours, I guess, is what that comment is saying, I believe. And, just a comment here on that, it may be a good way to test where more fixed routes should go. Erin, can you speak to that a little bit? I know we've talked about that, as a project team in terms of the city, even, using on demand as a means to monitor usage.
Yeah, you bet. That is something that's one of the benefits of having at least some on-demand transit service in the system, especially for the context like Portage La Prairie, where there is no current public transit service. So the idea is with these on-demand platforms, they keep the data of when people are hailing a ride or when they're requesting a ride, and then the system can start to accumulate a lot of information about where people are traveling to see where there might be common patterns and essentially be able to plan new fixed routes. So I think that's a great comment about that.
Okay, and just a few final ones here. So nice to have option of routes or on demand. And what about going on and off for multiple stops needed? For example, the bank and grocery shopping. So that was a comment I think that we got during our phase 1 as well. I can't particularly remember if it was from our stakeholder meetings or the public survey, monkey survey, but the sort of the idea of a pass in terms of multiple trips and one, main trip was looked at as well. Okay, so some comments on people might want to buy a weekly or monthly pass for the fixed route, but it may not be feasible to offer that for the on-demand model. And fixed could increase periodically to shift changes in the secondary areas. Okay, great. So thank you for all those comments on that. And then the final one we just want to generate a little bit more discussion and feedback on is this option 3, fixed route. We have somebody who doesn't like it already. I see they're selecting thumbs down there. So hopefully they'll tell us why. So again, some of the issues that you might feel exist for option 3. What are those for the 2 fixed route options? Okay, so not enough coverage. So again, sort of speaking to that the fixed routes itself is maybe limiting. So a lot of the residential areas are excluded, only serves a certain population or demographic, and it won't satisfy everybody. If you're not near a route, there is no service and a far bus stop from your point of destination. Erin, do you have anything to sort of add to, along sort of the vein of some of these comments?
Just that I think I agree with a lot of them from a technical perspective. That is kind of the limitation of a fixed route, is trying to keep it so that the bus can run on it often enough that it's still useful. It means that just from the point of physics, you can't cover the entirety of a community.
Great, thank you. Getting a few more in here. So if routes are improved, great for individuals who are not tech savvy or don't have access to Wi-Fi, and good for individuals who struggle with reading. So great comments, thank you. And then this is again the same question. We're just recognizing that before we asked you to sort of represent those various personas, and this one is just more personally for you. What is the best transit option for you in Portage La Prairie? Would you prefer, would fully on demand meet your needs over hybrid fixed and on demand, or fixed routes? What would be your choice? Just a few more trickling in here, but it really looks like that option 2, that hybrid fixed and on demand, is the preferable sort of rating for this question and for individuals on this call. So okay, thank you very much for your feedback there. So I'm going to stop sharing. There's no more Mentimeter questions. I'm going to get Brad, if you want to reshare the PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, can you see it now?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Awesome, good.
So really the next is just questions. If you have questions for the project team, we're here to answer them. There we go. So feel free to unmute yourself. I see, Rachel, you already have your hand up, so feel free to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you guys for doing this. This is really informative. I was just wondering, I'm not sure if you know if there's anyone on this call if there's any students or any seniors or anyone that might struggle with accessibility. Like when you guys did the registration, was that taken in account? Just, I had a hard time answering those survey questions of, if you're a senior. Well, I'm not a senior, so I don't know if I can answer for them. Like those questions would be really good, to present to the whole community. Is that going to be something that would happen?
Well, that is the purpose of this event. Like this event was open to anybody in the community. Unfortunately, at this time we are limited in terms of meeting in person, obviously,
right.
Which would have been a preference, but the event was advertised like publicly. So there were no specific invitations for people. Anybody could attend.
Okay.
This. Yeah.
And I'm concerned because I work with some youth, and some youth that don't have access to the internet or have cellular data. And I said, okay, what would help you? And the first thing that this youth blurted out would be a bus. So that person is unable to have her voice because she doesn't have internet and Wi-Fi. So I'm just wondering how many more are there that would have that that ability to be able to voice this on this forum. But I guess that's why we're here, so we can help.
For sure. And, I guess I would also note that, it has been a common theme throughout our sort of project team discussions. We have representation from the city as well as PCRC on sort of our steering committee for our project team. And so, many of the things that you're bringing up have been, reiterated by people on that group as well.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Good. Has there ever been a thought to have in any of the routes, probably with the fixed route, I don't know, the fixed hybrid, but to have a bus that say does let's say the east end, and then has a middle meeting point, and then another bus that does the west end, and then you kind of switch off and transfer if you need to go back. So you kind of have two, like a bus on each side, and then in the middle they would transfer if they needed to go to the other side. Like, is that something that was thought of as well? I mean, Portage is a really hard city to compare other cities to because it's so spread out, like lengthwise, like it's really spread out. And I just wasn't sure if that, like, if you guys ever looked at that.
Yeah, Erin, can I hand that one to you?
We did look at a few different options for fixed routes, and I'd caveat these routes as examples of what a fixed route could be, but not necessarily, what the final solution would be. We looked at the possibility of kind of covering all residential neighborhoods, but we wanted to focus on the north of the train tracks to make sure that we were including that community.
For sure.
So I think there's a couple different models. Like, I think what you're describing with sort of an east and west end route is in some ways similar to our option 3, where we're sort of doing a south and north route. But certainly I think one of our goals was to try to keep the routes so that a bus could do them within 30 minutes. But if that was less of a priority, then there's lots of opportunities with route design.
I just have one more tiny other question. With the on-demand one, they would be under, like, let's say, more, say, strict regulations for safety concerns?
So an on-demand transit system can look like a lot of different things, but in a sense, it is exactly a public transit system. And so the city could establish kind of operating standards for the system. So there wouldn't be any difference in safety regulations between the fixed route system and the on-demand system, if that's helpful, because they would both be operated by the municipality. It would just be that the on-demand vehicle or shuttle or bus could be accessed really on demand rather than operating on that fixed route.
And I think some concerns were raised of, are they going to have like regulatory features of, safety checks or criminal record checks or child abuse registry checks? Because there could be a situation where, a woman, or sorry, someone who's vulnerable could be traveling alone with this person.
And so that's sort of the assumption that we've had in developing these options are that it would be transit operators operating the on-demand vehicles too.
Okay.
So less so kind of like hiring an external taxi company that can hire any driver, but really definitely more regulated. So that's a good comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I see Kathy has her hand up, so we'll go to Kathy in a moment, but I just want to go through a few of the questions/comments that are just coming in on the chat. So Megan had noted that she shared the same concerns as Rachel. We have a question about who would be in charge of the booking and hail app, and would it be put out to bid? I don't know, Erin, if you have any answer to that.
That would typically be how this would work in a public transit system, would be the city putting out an RFP for either just the technology for the on-demand transit by itself, or sometimes you see hiring technology and an operator at the same time and providing kind of a turnkey solution.
And can I just speak up here for a second as
Please.
Jocelyn
Yeah.
Liquid-Jobin speaking? just to be clear, it wouldn't be based on a lowest cost. There would be, cost would be one of the considerations, but it wouldn't be the main consideration for something like that. But we would have to put it out to a competitive tender.
Thanks. And then just before Kathy goes here, I have just a comment from Morag about the possibility of doing outdoor engagement events in person. So just a comment about that it seems like maybe some of the people on the call here are representing their professional roles. And she's just raising a concern that we might not have engagement that is reflective of potential community users. So thanks for that comment, and we'll definitely take that away. So thank you. Kathy, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I just wanted to, well, first off, I work for the city, so I might be a little bit biased here. But before I moved to Selkirk, before I moved to Portage, I lived in Selkirk, and somebody mentioned about the city being spread out, and I do kind of think that Portage is very similar to Selkirk. There's a big box area on West Manitoba Avenue in Selkirk. There's a downtown area. I lived there when they started their transit. And so I don't think they had the answers at all. Like, they tried something and it's evolved over the years. And I think that's important too, that we have the ability to evolve this. I believe that initially it was one circular route that went through residential areas, through the downtown, out to the big box stores. Like they have the same thing. They have Walmart and Canadian Tire and various stores like that, and then circle back again. Now I know their system has evolved, but maybe that's a good point. Is I think we do need to collect data from others to try to make this system as effective as possible, but maybe it can evolve over time as people start to use it too.
Yeah, thank you for that. We have another comment that fixed routes definitely put some onus on the rider. So the rider has to plan how long the route takes to get to and from where they're going. Just a note here from a previous transit rider in Winnipeg. From that perspective, it took this person who made the comment 1 hour and 15 minutes to get to work. So planning is key for sure. Okay, so just a comment on if I hadn't looked for the transit options for a friend, I wouldn't have known about this at all. So I think that is a comment on this engagement session tonight and less on the transit options per se. I think that's what I'm getting from that. A question on the fixed route buses. Would those be similar to size of the ones in Winnipeg and Brandon, or something smaller? Erin.
So I was actually just chatting with some colleagues about this morning. We don't have a clear answer on the size of the vehicles yet, but I would imagine that they would not need to be the size of a big city bus that we typically see. And that's just because of the level of demand that we might expect in Portage. So I think it's possible to go with a smaller vehicle type. Information on that forthcoming.
What about language barriers? So is that a consideration that Erin could be included as part of an app, for example, that it's translated in different languages so all people could be served? Is that something that you've seen in other jurisdictions?
That's a great point. I do know that some of the on-demand technology providers do have the capacity to offer their app in different languages, and that's something that could be built into an RFP process.
Will vehicles be wheelchair accessible? Erin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I would expect that, again, the sort of public nature of the transit system, that sort of regardless of the option that we're looking at, the intent would be that the vehicles would be wheelchair accessible. Yes,
and there's lots of different sizes of accessible vehicles. So I think there's plenty of choice to choose from, and understanding the goals of the transit system in Portage, I think that would be a key priority.
And then one other question that we have is if we can speak to flexibility on if any of the options would logistically be the most cost or resource effective starting point from which to evolve. I think, Erin, you can probably speak to that. We've talked about that.
Yeah, from a planning resource perspective, really until you have clear data about where people are traveling or where transit users are traveling, it's hard to guess. We can do our best to guess by proxy, but I think that's really the value that the on-demand system brings as a starting point, because then it empowers the city with information about where people do actually want to travel on the transit system, so that if the next evolution is a hybrid of a fixed route and on-demand or fully fixed routes, then those routes are really tailored to the preferences of Portage residents. The other benefit from the cost efficiency perspective is that an on-demand system by its nature doesn't operate unless someone wants to ride the bus. So some complaints in other communities of similar sizes are that sometimes buses on fixed routes will be driving around empty because they're operating even if people are not on the bus. And that tends to be one of the benefits that we've heard for on-demand, is that it's a bit more efficient because the buses don't operate when there's no demand.
Okay, we have a comment that Thompson has 2 buses, one that does East End, one that does West End. They meet in the middle downtown every half hour. Then riders can transfer if they need to go to the opposite end of town. They use large buses, but then reduce to smaller ones. With bigger buses, the already congested parking on Saskatchewan Avenue would then be more congested. So would smaller buses that are wheelchair accessible be a better option? That, I guess, is in relation to the fixed route.
There are a lot of benefits in going with smaller transit buses when you don't need them to satisfy a lot of demand. And one of them is that the routing is more flexible because they can operate on smaller roadways. So I would say that is correct.
Okay. So we can maybe move to the next slide, Brad. Thank you. If anybody still has questions or comments, they can feel free to unmute themselves and just ask. We have a very manageable group size tonight, or put it in the chat. But this is our timeline again that I presented early on in the presentation. So as you know, we are here at phase 2 engagement in September, and after this, we're taking the feedback that we've received tonight in part to help us make a recommendation on the preferred option, and then have a final report submitted to the city in October. Next slide, please. So that's really all, unless anybody has any additional questions or comments. My contact information is here, email or phone number. I'm happy to hear about anything else that you guys think of that you maybe didn't get to say tonight. But thank you for participating, and feel free to contact me. Oh, I maybe heard, did somebody unmute themselves?
Yeah, it was me, Diana. Okay. I just noticed there's a couple more comments.
Okay, great.
With a couple of questions.
Okay. Now they're coming in. People are really liking using the chat tonight. In the June meeting, the option of having a service run from Long Plain to Portage was discussed. Would that be still on the table, or was that determined as not feasible?
Could I just break in here? It's Jocelyn again. That when we were looking at Long Plain, we were talking about Kishkimakwa, not the reserve that's further away, just the urban reserve that we would provide service to, and that is still being considered.
Thanks, Jocelyn. With the amount of shuttles and taxis a person sees driving around, I would believe that the demand is there. So James is just speaking to sort of that existing, the taxi shuttles that exist in Portage right now. Okay, I think that looks like all. Some thank yous coming in. So thank you for taking time out of your evening for participating. It's you know, feedback is always really helpful, in particular for projects like this. So thank you very much. I'll just the project team will just hang on here just in case anybody else has any final questions, but people can feel free to yeah, Rachel says she's going to watch the debate. So